all of us have maybe our own views on what a shack computer is and what we can do. But I really think that we should consider maybe as part of your approach to amateur radio, the Raspberry Pi. It does have a lot of capability to it and is certainly a way to learn quite a bit about this interface between our computers and our radios. So with that, Jason, over to you, and we're looking forward to what you can share with us this evening. Take it away.
Thanks, Rick, and thanks for a wonderful introduction, and thank you guys for having me this evening. I'm going to just spend a few minutes and kind of walk you through a little bit of my background, how I wound up with the Raspberry Pi, and what we can do with it, and how we can use Build-A-Pi to make your life easy for you. So let's see if I can get screen sharing going here. Okay, so I am Jason, KM4ACK. And it was in 2009. Let me see if I can get my screen to cooperate here. There we go. In 2009, this is what the radar scan looked like in Middle Tennessee. Now, if you're not from a tornado area, you may not be real familiar with what this is. Every red box you see was a tornado warning. So that is either ground verified by weather spotters or radar indicated. It can be either or. That day turned out to be a pretty nasty day for us. These are the images that I captured the day after the storm. And these images were made about 1,000 yards from my home. There was something around 850 houses damaged in my city alone. Bottom right picture, you see the police car there in the distance. That's actually the turn in to my neighborhood. So this was literally right on top of us that day. An EF4 tornado, for those that are unfamiliar with tornado ratings, carries 166 to 200 mile per hour winds. We lost power and communications for 48 hours thereabouts. And I'll be the first to admit that I was completely unprepared for this event. So I knew that I never wanted to feel that helpless again, and I started looking at ways to prepare myself and my family should we ever be faced with a situation like this again. Now, I didn't start with communications. In fact, that was one of the last things on my list. I started with generators. I started with things that I knew, like generators that would power things that we needed, food and water for the family. And it was actually several years later when I started looking into communications that my brother-in-law introduced me to this weird thing called ham radio. I'd never heard of it. I knew nothing about it, but 2 or 3 hours into that conversation, I knew that I had to know more about this. So it was finally in 2014 when I sat down and took my technician license. A couple of months later, I took the general, and about a year later, I went ahead and took the extra. Now, I've always kind of been a geek at heart. I love playing with computers. I've been playing with them pretty much my entire life. So once I found out you could marry a computer to a radio, well, I was hooked. Some of the first things I played with was PSK31, which was all the rage around 2014. And I started delving into WinLink. And then that's carried on through FT8 around 2017, and then JSA Call. But because I was looking at this from an emergency communications standpoint, that meant that I wanted to run my station on solar and battery power. And I started looking at laptops and how much power they were consuming when we had to recharge them. Now, if they're running off batteries, it wasn't a big deal, but you're not going to run a laptop for 48 hours during an emergency. So I started looking at some way to reduce the power consumption of that laptop. And I came up with a Raspberry Pi. I started playing with it and poking at it. A Raspberry Pi will only draw about 350 to 400 milliamps from a 12-volt source. A laptop is going to draw somewhere between 2 and 3 amps from that same 12-volt source. So it takes quite a bit more power to keep that laptop online. So some of the pros of the Raspberry Pi, just one of them is that low power consumption. They're also fairly low cost when you compare them to a laptop. You can go all in with everything you need, sound cards and GPSs and cases and fans and everything for 125 to 150 bucks. So they're relatively low cost. And there's lots of applications available for them. Most everything we need as far as ham radio is concerned is available on the Raspberry Pi. There are a few exceptions to that, but not many. The other cool thing about the Raspberry Pi is just about everything out there ham radio related is open source. So if you've got the skill set and you want to make a change to one of those applications, you can take that application and change it to suit your needs. And then we have Build-A-Pi, but we'll get back to that in just a few minutes. Now, what can we do with a Raspberry Pi? One of the things we can do is WinLink. The Raspberry Pi has an application called PAT. PAT is a WinLink client. With WinLink, for those that might not be familiar, we can use Pat WinLink to send WinLink to other WinLink accounts, or send email rather to other WinLink accounts. We can send email to regular internet email accounts like Gmail, Hotmail, Yahoo. We can also use WinLink to send text messages. We can send and receive position reports. And as of the latest version of Pat WinLink, we've now got access to WinLink forms. This has been one of the big pieces that's been missing from Pat WinLink for those that work with served agencies and they need access to things like ICS forms and Red Cross forms. All of those are now baked into Pat WinLink as of the latest version. And we can do all of this type of communication strictly over RF. No internet, no cell phone is needed. Other things that we've got available to us on the Raspberry Pi is FLDigi. And it's not just limited to FLDigi, but it's the entire FLDigi suite. So FLRig, FLDigi, and several others that are available in that suite. Beyond FLDigi, something probably everybody that's done digital knows about is WSJTX, more commonly called FT8. That is also available to us on the Raspberry Pi. And FT8 is great for filling up the logbook pretty quick. It is a weak signal application where you simply exchange your call, your grid, and a signal report with another operator. In addition to that, we've got applications like JS8 Call. And this is one that not as many people are familiar with. It is built on the FT8 foundation, so it's still got the weak signal capabilities to it. But we can have actual QSOs via keyboard to keyboard chat. So we're not just limited to exchanging a call sign and a signal report, but we can actually have a conversation. Some of the other cool things about JS8 Call is it actually builds its own network through a series of heartbeats and acknowledgements. And it's got a lot of extras built in, like relays and messaging. Now, if you haven't heard of JS8 Call before, I have done quite a few videos in the past, and this link here will link you to several of those that I've done that's out there and available on my channel. We'll leave it sitting right there for just a second in case anybody wants to write that down. Now, I mentioned Build-A-Pi to you a few minutes ago. So exactly what is Build-A-Pi? Well, Build-A-Pi is a script designed to remove the headaches of installing ham radio applications on a Raspberry Pi computer. If you're brand new to Linux, it can be a little scary when somebody tells you you've got to build an application from source. It's not something that if you grew up in a Windows world, you're even going to have a clue where to start. Build-A-Pi removes all of that for you so you can get up and running quickly. Now, how is Build-A-Pi different? There are images available, some images even specific for ham radio that you can download and flash to a SD card and insert into your Raspberry Pi, and you're up and running. The problem with that is you have no control over what's installed on the Raspberry Pi if you go with a particular image. You have to take what the author thinks is needed on your Raspberry Pi. Build-A-Pi is different because it gives you complete control and allows you to choose what gets installed, and more importantly, sometimes what doesn't get installed on your Raspberry Pi. And Build-A-Pi makes this super easy. It's literally one command to install and get this up and running. And it includes some of the most often requested, most used ham radio software that we've already mentioned: WinLink, WSJTX, JS8 Call, FL-Digi. But you can customize it to suit your needs. So maybe you just want to build an APRS digipeater. Well, if that was the case, you really don't need JS8 Call or FT8 on that system. Build-A-Pi allows you to pick and choose exactly what you want. Now, I mentioned a while ago that it was one line to install, and that line of code is there underlined in red inside the gray box on your screen. It looks like two lines of code, but in Linux, we can use the backslash at the end of the first line to tell Linux we're not finished. And it breaks it up, makes it a little bit easier to see on the install instruction page here. But you literally copy both lines at the same time, paste them into the terminal window, and hit the return button. You'll give Build-A-Pi a few minutes. It's going to go through and install a few things that it needs to work with. And after about 3 minutes or so, you'll be presented with this screen here. And it just asks you to enter your call sign. Once you get your call sign entered and you hit continue, you're going to come up to the first of 4 screens that allow you to install different applications. Now, you're free to install as little or as much as you want. A lot of guys install everything the first time through just to kind of get a feel for the way things work. But the first screen is kind of your base apps, some of the base underlying things that we need in order for other applications to work. So HamLib, for instance, is needed if you want to do rig control. If you want to run a GPS with your Raspberry Pi, the GPS software is there. So you simply put a check mark beside each of the applications that you want to install. If you want to run RDOP, which is needed to do PAT WinLink HF communications, you put a check mark beside RDOP. We've got Direwolf there, which is a software TNC, AX25, and the Pulse sound server. Once you choose what you want on that screen, you simply hit next, and you're presented with the second of the 4 screens here. And this is the FL-Digi suite. Now, if it's your first time through, I do recommend that you install FL-Rig. That's kind of the basis that Build-A-Pi uses for rig control, that and HamLib that we saw on the previous screen. Then you can go ahead and install any of the other pieces of the FL-Digi suite that you want. The next screen is Ham Apps, and this is kind of all of the applications that you may want on your Raspberry Pi, depending on what you intend to do with it. So we've got PAT and PAT Menu. PAT, again, is the WinLink client. PAT Menu gives us an easy way to interface with PAT when we need to make changes to the configuration. Maybe we want to log one user out and log another ham radio operator in and allow them to use our computer and check their own email. You've got Chirp available to you, which is used to program radios, WSJTX, JS8 Call. Now, below that, you'll start to notice we've got a few options. So let's look at Exaster and Yak, for instance. Both of those are APRS clients. You can install both of them, or you can pick your favorite. That's kind of the cool thing about it, is because we don't have to install things that's going to add bloat to the system if we really don't need it. Same thing with PyQso, CQR log, and hammers. All three of those are logging applications that you can use. Some guys prefer one over the other. We give you a choice of three. Hammers is one of the brand new ones. You're actually looking at some beta software that will be released later this week. So Hammers is one of the new applications that we're adding to 3.0.8. Other applications that we can install are QSSTV, if you want to do slow scan TV, Grid Tracker, if you want to keep up with which grids you've worked, NWSJTX. We've got Ham Clock available to us. Ham Clock is a clock that's specifically geared to ham radio operators. Kind of a cool little app if you've never seen it before. We've got other applications for satellite tracking like gPredict. If you do Logbook of the World, then you'll need TQSL installed. And finally, we have GridCalc. And GridCalc is some software that I've written. If you like to do any packet work, whether that's WinLink or bulletin boards or whatever in the field, that application actually looks at the two grids. It'll give you the distance between them, and it will give you a bearing to the other grid square. Really helpful if you're using a Yagi antenna and you need to get it orientated correctly. Finally, we've got a page of utilities that we can install with Build-A-Pi. So simple things like a dipole calculator was a quick little script that I've written where you punch in the frequency you want to work, and it'll tell you how long each leg of the dipole needs to be. We've got other things in there, a packet search tool to help you find WinLink gateways that utilize packet that are nearby to you. We've got log viewer applications. PyStats is an application that will allow you to monitor some various things going on with the Raspberry Pi, your CPU usage, your memory usage, things of that nature. And then some other various things. We've even got Lin BPQ that's on here. So if you want to set your Raspberry Pi up as a WinLink gateway, you would want to install Lin BPQ. So it's got a whole host of applications that you can install, and it's literally as simple as putting a check mark next to the name. Once you get to the final screen, you go ahead and click install or update selected, and the thing will start. Now, if you do choose to install everything, depending on your internet connection, it can take roughly 4 hours for everything to be built and installed on your Pi. What I typically do is I'll start this thing up if I'm doing a new build. I'll start it up right before I go to bed. Once I get through this final screen and I hit the install button, I can walk away. It's going to do the rest of the work for me. On some of the previous screens, you may see some additional boxes depending on what you choose to install. For instance, if you do choose to install WinLink, it is going to pop up a box and ask you for your WinLink credentials so that it can go ahead and configure that in WinLink for you. It's just one less thing you have to do after you get the Raspberry Pi up and running. Now, what's some of the things we can do with the Raspberry Pi? We can build iGates, digipeaters. We can do propagation prediction. I've already mentioned the logging and the WinLink client and gateway. Software TNCs, we can build out packet networks, satellite prediction. There's a whole host of different things that you can do with the Raspberry Pi. And it's a lot of fun to get out there and start experimenting with these various projects. Now, I want to bring this presentation kind of full circle to where I started and share a little bit more about me with you guys. Christmas morning of 2020, this is what we woke up to. It was the Nashville Christmas bombing. That bombing was a solo act that targeted the AT&T building in downtown Nashville. Again, we were faced with a loss of internet and a loss of cell phone. This outage spread well into Kentucky and as far south as Huntsville, Alabama, and Atlanta, Georgia. Fortunately, this time we did not lose power. So that was one thing that we had going in our favor. And the big difference for me was I had a communications plan for this event. I was able to take a Raspberry Pi computer with Build-A-Pi and a lot of the applications that I just walked you guys through, and I was able to use WinLink to communicate not only with hams, but with non-hams as well through email and text messages. I was able to stay in touch with friends and loved ones, because remember, this happened on Christmas morning. And what's the one thing you do on Christmas morning? You usually reach out to your family, wish them a Merry Christmas. When nobody can get in touch with you, they start to wonder what's going on. And once this news made national news, it kind of had some of my family a bit freaked out until I reached out to them through WinLink. So Raspberry Pi can really, really come in handy. Fortunately, we didn't have to run it on battery, but that was available if we needed it. If you want to learn more about the Raspberry Pi, I do run a YouTube channel that they mentioned in the beginning. It's youtube.com/KM4ACK. I have got a host of videos. I think we're just passing 250 or 275 now, and probably half of those, or over half of those, deal strictly with the Raspberry Pi. You can also find out more at raspberrypi.org. Do you guys have any questions?
Yeah, Jason, do you have any recommendations regarding Raspberry Pi, like a 3 or Model 4? Or does it matter?
Yeah, I would not buy a Raspberry Pi 3 at this point. I would buy the Raspberry Pi 4, and it comes in 3 different flavors. You can get the 2 gig model, the 4 gig model, or the 8 gig model. Right now, I would probably save 20 bucks and I would stay at the 4 gig model. There's not a lot of advantage to having an 8 gig model. Now, they are working on some 64-bit software for the Raspberry Pi. Once that becomes available and they can take advantage of that full 8 gigs of RAM, it might be advantageous to go ahead and upgrade. But right now, I believe I only own one of the 8 gig models so that I could do some testing. My others are 4s, the 4 gig model, and I do not see a big difference between, I don't see any difference between the 4 gig model and the 8 gig model.
So you didn't say anything about interfaces. Since we all have or seem to have different radios, can we find information about hooking up our radios to the Pi on your site, or is there any other place you can direct us to?
Yeah, I would recommend the forum when it comes to interfacing with the radio. One of the reasons I don't mention that is because every radio is different and there's a lot of different options out there. I've got a couple of Yaesu 857s, an 817, and an 891. I'm able to use a little USB sound card that's like $7 or $8. But now if you've got an IC 7300 or one of the newer ICOM 705s, they've got sound cards built in. You don't even have to worry about it. You can literally go straight from the Raspberry Pi to the radio and configure it. But if you want to know more, if you guys head over to groups.io and simply do a search for my call sign, that's the forum where we provide tech support for Build-A-Pi. And there's a lot of guys over there using a lot of different radios. So I'm sure we can get you pointed in the right direction. It's hard for me, though, if you own a 7300, to help you out because I don't own that particular radio.
Sure,
Yes,
there might be
Dan.
some other questions.
Yes,
Feel
Dan,
free
I
to
have a
go ahead.
question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I've been using an SDR for some Raspberry Pi work, and I'm wondering, I didn't notice in your list, do you have any SDR software in your Build-A-Pi?
No, I do not. Now, you can always add the SDR software yourself after the fact, but SDR is just one of the things that we haven't added to the project as of today.
Okay, and then my second question, we need to start with some sort of Raspberry Pi image before we start loading these applications. Do you have a particular image that you would recommend?
So you're talking about the operating system itself?
Correct.
Yeah, so I prefer, there's 3 levels of that. You've got the light version, which you don't want to use. In fact, Build-A-Pi won't work with it because it's command line only. There's 2 that give you a desktop environment. And I can't remember exactly how the foundation names those, but one of them is, I believe, desktop, and then the other one is desktop with recommended applications. I typically run the one that is just the desktop without the recommended applications in there. Really, the only main thing you might be missing if you go that route is you might not have all of the office tools that you might want on there. So the spreadsheets and the word processing, you might want, if you need those, you might want to go ahead and go to the full version with the recommended applications. Build-A-Pi will work equally well on either one of those.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, Jason, how big of a SD card do you need for all your software?
I believe it'll still load on a 16 gig. I recommend everybody goes to a 32 gig. There's not a lot of advantage to go into something larger than that unless you plan to store a lot of documents on your Raspberry Pi. A 32 gig card should serve you just fine.
What's the interface for keyboard and video?
So you've got a couple of different options for keyboard and video. You can go straight to the Raspberry Pi and connect up a monitor. The Pi 4s have 2 HDMI ports out for video, and then you can use USB mouse and keyboard. The way I prefer to do it, though, is I run them in a headless mode. So the Raspberry Pi has nothing connected to it, and then I'll take a tablet and wirelessly connect the tablet to the Raspberry Pi. Once I've done that, I can use what's called VNC, and I can use the VNC viewer to view everything on the Raspberry Pi. So I can see its screen, and then I can control the mouse and the keyboard with a mouse and keyboard on the tablet itself. So typically an on-screen keyboard. If I'm doing a longer event, sometimes I may add a full screen or full-sized keyboard to that setup. If I'm doing a lot of digital work, only because it's a little easier to type on a full-size keyboard versus a tablet.
Good info.
Is there a VNC viewer available for iPads?
Yes, the VNC viewer is available for the iPad. It's available for the iPhone, but that's really challenging with the limited screen real estate. You can get it for Android, you can get it for PC, you can get it for Mac.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Jason, quick question. We use a lot of WinLink in this area. Would it be possible to give a short demo of PAT on the Pi, or is that too involved to set up?
Yeah, I don't have anything set up right at this particular moment that I can share on screen with you. If you head over to the channel, I've got a whole host of videos specifically on Pat WinLink.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yes, sir.
That brings up another question on WinLink. You mentioned WinLink, that the Pat WinLink now has forms built in. Are those forms tied to the sort of the standard PC WinLink so that when those forms are updated, they're automatically updated in PAT?
It's not automatically updated, but it is tied to the same source. And it's as simple as going in and clicking update the forms, and it'll pull in the latest version for you.
Okay, great. Because we make use of those forms quite a lot in
Yeah,
our work with Aries.
and that's been a huge complaint in the past of Pat WinLink was the lack of forms. So I was really relieved when they finally decided to push those into the latest version.
Yeah, that would definitely be critical for us. In fact, I didn't realize that that was possible. So I was kind of considering, the Pi to be just short of what I needed for my regular use. That brings up another question. VARA FM. I'm not aware that VARA FM exists for the Pi.
Now you've hit a sore spot with me.
Sorry.
Bora, no, that's okay. Bora is not available on anything outside of Windows. There are some workarounds where you can get it running on Linux under Wine with an x86 processor, but because the Pi uses an ARM processor, that's not yet possible. And the reason I say it's a sore spot with me, I don't believe, I believe anything that's closed source goes against the spirit of ham radio. So I think it should be cross-platform and available for anything you want to run it on.
Yeah, we do have a couple of users who successfully used that on a Mac with Parallels.
Right, but that means they're running Windows on their Mac.
That's right.
Right.
But it works.
Yeah, and there is another workaround, I believe, where you can run Wine on, I just read this on WinLink's website the other day. I think they have successfully gotten it to run under the native Mac platform recently, but I haven't experimented with that at all.
Okay, any more questions for Jason?
Sure. Hey, Jason, this is Rick here again. You mentioned in one of the other slides about your communications plan, before there during the tornadoes and then there at the Christmas bombing, you'd made, really you had become more prepared, had things in place. Obviously, your Raspberry Pi and the build around that is not the only part of your communications plan. What can you give us maybe just kind of a general outline of what you have as a personal communications plan, and maybe how that fits into what you do with some of the other things that you do with Aries and maybe some of the other larger radio community there where you are?
Yes, so my personal plan and an Aries plan is two totally different beasts. I'm the only ham radio operator in the family outside of my brother-in-law. So if I want to communicate with family, I've got to use something outside of ham radio. And I have moved to GMRS for local communications here, and we're working on getting a GMRS repeater installed at a good elevation so that we've got more coverage area. Outside of that, for people that are further away, for instance, my mom and dad are about 150 air miles from me. Neither one of them are radio operators. But with WinLink and being able to send both text messages and emails, that allows me to communicate with those that are not ham radio operators. And if I send a text message to my mom and she replies, the next time I check my WinLink account, her reply is going to come right back in to my WinLink inbox, provided you've got your whitelist set up correctly. That was one thing that I did get bit with during the Nashville bombing. I did not have my whitelist set up correctly because WinLink had actually changed the rules for the whitelist, and I hadn't kept current on the changes that they had made. There was a workaround that I made. I wasn't getting replies from her text messages was the problem. And again, that was due to the whitelist and the filters that I needed to open up. But I simply sent her a text and told her to check her email, and we went back and forth then via email, where she's not one that really lives with email open every day. So sending her a text message and just alerting her, those messages were going through fine. And then we were able to move that over to email to finish up. So we had two-way communications there. But that's a bit different than what we do in Aries. I'm sure my Aries group is very similar to yours, and we use a mix of VHF, UHF, and HF, both digital and voice, to accomplish those the communications that we need.
Yeah, I had a follow-up question on that. Just kind of curious about the state of gateways there in Tennessee. When you had that communications outage on Christmas Day, were you using HF to reach an internet connected gateway, or were you able to sort of daisy chain some VHF gateways?
Okay, so this was the interesting part of this one. This was a bombing that targeted the AT&T building. A lot of the Comcast infrastructure was untouched. Some of it did become overloaded, but I tried to connect to a regular 2-meter or a 2-meter gateway that I regularly connect to, and lo and behold, it had a Comcast internet service. So I didn't have to mess around with HF. I could have gone HF if I needed to, but I always prefer working with packet, 2-meter packet, because it's a whole lot faster than HF. So I was fortunate in that event that I could use that local 2-meter packet gateway that's about 30, 35 miles from me.
Yeah, good.
So cool thing about that is I can actually use the 817 and about a half of watt of power to get into that gateway.
Jason, thank you very much. It was very, very informative, and I've certainly enjoyed many of your videos. You have several radios, and you have videos of various deployments that you've made. Do you have a different Raspberry Pi set up for each of your radios, or is just a single Raspberry Pi suitable for all of them?
Personally, I have one for every single radio that I own. So, well, all of my HF and my HF rigs anyway. I don't necessarily have one for every HT that I own. I find it simpler, but there are ways that you can use one Raspberry Pi and configure it to work with multiple radios with very little headaches. That's a bit more of an advanced topic, but I did do a video, can't remember how far back it was, how you can configure FL Rig to work with 2 different radios. Once you get that, depending on the radio and the sound card that you're using with each radio, it would be very minimal setup. But again, it is a bit more of an advanced topic when you're trying to configure it for 2 different radios. So simplicity's sake, buy one for each radio. They're cheap enough.
Thank you.
Jason, thank you very much. This is it's one thing to watch your videos. They're all, very informative such, but it's also, it's the next level to have you here with us and presenting and answering the questions. So I'm certain we've got a number of folks here probably going to be purchasing or at least dusting off maybe some of the Raspberry Pis that they may have, or maybe reconfiguring the ones. I know that Jeff asked a little while ago there about those forums. Might be time to get out and start doing that there with Pat Winlink. So Jason, once again, from not only the South Pasadena Amateur Radio Club, but the larger radio community here in the San Gabriel Valley of Southern California, I want to thank you for being here with us. I know it's a little later back where you are here than it is out here. So thanks for maybe not staying up maybe too past your bedtime, but we certainly appreciate the information that you've given us here tonight. So I certainly speak for all of us when I say thank you once again, and hope to hear from you soon. And we'll let you know if we've got our successes and such. We'll be sure to pass them along to you, and certainly credit you for kicking us in the right direction here. So. Right.
Definitely. Well, again, thank you guys for having me. One warning before I leave. If you've never bought a Raspberry Pi, once you buy one, you'll own at least 2 more in 12 months. So they do get addictive. Hey guys, thanks a lot for having me this evening.
Bye.